Please be seated. We're back on the record. I understand that we have a verdict. Are we ready for the jury to come in?
We are, Your Honor. Yes, Your Honor.
Okay, let's go ahead and bring him in. And I will remind everybody in the courtroom that there's to be no outbursts upon the reading of the verdict or afterwards. Please be seated. Members of the jury, have you reached a verdict? If you'll please fold the verdict form and hand it to Deputy Jarvis. Thank you. Okay, if you'll please publish the verdict.
In the Circuit Court of the 18th Judicial Circuit in and for Seminole County, Florida, State of Florida versus George Zimmerman. Verdict: we, the jury, find George Zimmerman not guilty. So say we all four-person.
Does either side want to poll the jury?
We would, Your Honor.
Okay, ladies and gentlemen, as your juror number is being called, please answer whether this is your verdict.
Juror B29, is this your verdict? Yes. Juror B76, is this your verdict? Yes. Juror B37, is this your verdict?
Yes.
Juror B51, is this your verdict?
Yes.
Juror E6, is this your verdict?
Yes.
Juror E40, is this your verdict?
Yes.
Thank you.
Ladies, I wish to thank you for your time and consideration of this case. I also wish to advise you of some very special privileges enjoyed by jurors. No juror could ever be required to talk about the discussions that occurred in the jury room except by court order. For many centuries, our society has relied upon juries for consideration of difficult cases. We have recognized for hundreds of years that a jury's deliberations, discussions, and votes should remain their private affair as long as they wish it. Therefore, the law gives you an unique privilege not to speak about the jury's work. Although you are at liberty to speak with anyone about your deliberations, you are also at liberty to refuse to speak to anyone. A request to discuss
Judge Deborah Nelson thanking the 6 members of the Seminole County jury that has just acquitted George Zimmerman on second-degree murder charges and presumably and also acquitting him on the other charge of manslaughter. Very little reaction from an emotionally charged case. Very little reaction in the courtroom. You see Mr. Zimmerman listening intently as the judge continues to thank the members of the jury and letting them know that they don't have to talk to anybody about this. I want to go to Kendall Coffey right now, who is a defense attorney and NBC News legal analyst in Florida. Kendall, I noticed they didn't go through the 2 counts of second-degree murder and manslaughter. When it was not guilty, that was blanket across the board.
It was blanket across the board. And it's important to remember that from the beginning of this case, it was a matter of a fight, a fatal shot, and a self-defense claim by the only one who was still alive. It was never an easy prosecution case, a lot of setbacks during the trial. And so while the jury obviously studied this very carefully and conscientiously, they came back with a not guilty on both second-degree murder and manslaughter.
We should note this comes several hours after this jury posed a question to the judge in the form of a note asking for a little clarification on the rules regarding manslaughter. The response was, well, we need a more specific question. My understanding is that never came. But you see now the shot inside the courtroom. George Zimmerman there, the center of your screen on the right, along with his defense team, congratulating each other. Again, not a huge display of emotion, but clearly a look of relief across Mr. Zimmerman's face. To recount the events of that night, a neighborhood watchman, spotted someone he thought was suspicious. Turned out to be Trayvon Martin. An altercation occurred between the two of them, not fully witnessed by any one person. Shot was fired. Zimmerman claimed self-defense, fired that fatal shot into the heart of Trayvon Martin. It was several weeks before charges were filed. That led to large protests in Sanford, Florida, great displays of emotion, the case finally coming to trial. And now, after almost 3 weeks, a not guilty verdict against George Zimmerman. NBC's Ron Mott has been in Sanford covering this story from the start. What was the level of preparation, Ron, in the community for a verdict one way or the other? There are a lot of people out there tonight gathered outside that courthouse.
Yeah, hey there, Lester. Well, I suspect that there will be a few more people gathering here tonight. There have been about 150 people throughout the day milling about waiting for this jury's verdict, if they would in fact reach one today. Now, this was obviously a very deliberative process, it seems, for them. They got about 3.5 hours worth of deliberations done yesterday and close to 13 hours today. So by my count, nearly 16.5 hours. The only question that they had yesterday, Lester, as you recall, is they asked about the evidence list. They wanted to get a list of all the evidence in this trial. And then today, of course, late tonight, they asked about this manslaughter charge and wanted a little more instruction on that. And so going forward, I suspect that a lot of people obviously will be questioning this jury's verdict, and there'll be some discussions about how they reached that verdict, perhaps what that manslaughter question that they asked late tonight might have had to do with the verdict they ultimately reached here. But I can hear choppers flying out, and as I said, I suspect that there will be more people here in Sanford who may ultimately make their way here to the courthouse to voice their support of this decision or their displeasure with the decision.
Only 6 people in that jury room. Only they know the discussions that went on in there. But from what we all observed, they worked through lunch, they worked through dinner, very diligent, asking a key question down the line in terms of the rules regarding manslaughter and coming to that decision. I want to bring in Kendall Coffey. And Kendall, again, we note the sensitive nature of this case. It drew huge emotion because of what many people thought was a lack of justice. They wanted an arrest in this case. There was an arrest. Justice has played itself out here. The jury had basically 3 questions, and that was the question of, was it self-defense, was it manslaughter, was it second-degree murder? Was there an unreasonable decision on either way? If no matter which way they would have gone, could it have been considered a reasonable decision?
Well, I think the judge had ruled that there was enough evidence to convict if the jury were to reach that conclusion, enough evidence beyond a reasonable doubt. So certainly there was sufficient evidence, and the prosecution in that sense has a small measure of indication. But Lester, there was significant evidence of self-defense. There's no denying it, including evidence that came from prosecution witnesses. They called the neighbor John Good, who talked about saying basically there was Trayvon Martin on top of George Zimmerman, mixed martial arts style. And of course, there was the Sanford police officer, again, a prosecution witness who seemed to validate George Zimmerman's accounts of what happened. So it was a difficult case from the beginning. It got tougher through each day of trial. And so while there's going to be a lot of disappointment in some quarters about the verdict, the jury obviously worked very, very hard and did their very best to seek justice. George
Zimmerman, who could have been in handcuffs before this night is over, now leaving the courtroom a free man, acquitted by this 6-member jury. And Kendall, there will be a lot of reviews about the prosecution. There were a lot of questions raised even as this went on about the quality of their witnesses. And the question that will be asked, was this the right charge that they went after, or did they perhaps seek too high a bar when they went for second-degree murder?
Well, I think second-degree murder was seen as a very aggressive charge when it was brought. Whatever the strategies may have been, I think by the end of the trial, you'll recall, it was the prosecution that was asking the judge to submit to the jury the lesser, more easily provable charge of manslaughter, and it was the defense that didn't want a manslaughter charge in the case. So the prosecution, anytime you lose, you're going to get second-guessed. They're certainly going to get second-guessed about whether second-degree murder was an appropriate charge in the first place.
All right, let's go to NBC's Kerry Sanders, who was inside the courtroom when that verdict was read. Give us a sense of what it was like in there, Kerry.
Well, Lester, I was sitting in the back of the courtroom. I had a clear shot across the courtroom as the 6 jurors walked in. They walked in all matter-of-factly, not looking at George Zimmerman. They each took their seats, and then when they sat down, the verdict form was handed over, and then we all saw that. As it was being read, I was looking at the jurors. None of the jurors were glancing towards George Zimmerman. They didn't look at him, as far as I could tell from my sitting, not once. I looked over to another portion of the courtroom, which is where Trayvon Martin's parents have been seated throughout the whole trial. They were not in the courtroom. Their attorneys were seated there, but Sabrina Fulton and Tracy Martin were not in the courtroom. When court concluded, their attorneys left the courtroom, and I walked with them as they went to a side room, which is a sort of a lawyer's conference room, and the door was open, small room. The parents were not in there either. I'm not sure if they're here at the courthouse tonight or not, but clearly they have been informed, as has the United States and the nation, of the actual verdict here. The jurors then left the courtroom. After they left, things were very quiet in the courtroom. I happened to be sitting next to defense attorney Mark O'Mara's wife. She was sitting there crying as that verdict was read.
Kerry Sanders, who was inside the courtroom. Again, to recap, if you're just joining us, George Zimmerman has been acquitted, found not guilty of second-degree murder in the death of Trayvon Martin, an unarmed teenager. Zimmerman, a Community Watch volunteer, shot Zimmerman in what he said was self-defense. The 6-woman jury apparently agreeing with that defense, again finding him not guilty. There's continuing coverage on MSNBC on cable. I'll see you tomorrow morning on Today with extensive coverage. Until then,